Carrie Tantarski from the DNA lab has confirmed that without a doubt, the DNA from Thomas Sweat matches the DNA taken from the Marine Corps pants in Arlington, the incendiary device fabric from 30th Street in D.C. and Blair Road in Maryland, and the hair from Anacostia Avenue. The next 48 hours are crucial because it's finally time to arrest the serial arsonist. ATF's Scott Fulkerson.
So, time of the arrest. Okay, so we recognized that we've had some issues with leaking of information in the task force in the past. We probably had about 24 hours before our knowledge of who the serial arsonist is to when, if we tell anybody else outside the task force, to that information being leaked, unfortunately. So when I got that information, my first phone call was to Tom Daly. And Tommy goes, he was sleeping because he worked an overnight surveillance on the task force the night before. And Tom goes, he picks up the phone. He's like, hello, very groggy. Just got back from, working overnight. I'm like, Thomas Sweat. He's the arsonist. I'll meet you at the task force. I'm leaving the search warrant right now. He's like, what are you talking about? Shock, disbelief, right? Only he's half asleep. More than half asleep. He's asleep. I'm like, Tommy, get up. I'll see you at the task force. We know that Thomas Sweat's a serial arsonist. He's like, all right, okay, all right. So we both hang up, and I recognize the fact that he didn't even hear a word I said. So I call back, and I said, and his wife answered. I said, please, can you wake up Tom? Get him some coffee, get him on the road, and get him to the task force. We know who the serial arsonist is. And she's like, yeah, Scott, yep, I'll do it, Scott. Yep, I'll do it. He goes, you sure? I'm like, yes, please get him going. We need him at the task force, right? So at that time we have an all text, we have that Nextel all text page thing. Yeah. So I sent that out with no information. I actually contacted Tijuana Patty. The next person I sent information to, I said, Tijuana, send out a text. We know who it is. But don't tell them what the meeting's about. Say all hands, mandatory, get to the task force, all hands on deck. She sends an all text out on the Nextel, tells everybody to report to that office at whatever it was, 11 o'clock in the morning. So we all roll to the task force. Everyone's in the briefing room. Everyone's concerned. They're like, what's going on? Is it like, someone okay? Are we getting is internal affairs coming? I mean, what's the big secret? Like, there's speculation, but what's the big secret? And at that point I presented to everybody like I would normally do in a briefing. I said, guess what? Thomas Sweat's our guy. Once again, shock, disbelief, to the point of almost an argument.
Really?
As to whether or not we actually have the right person.
This is Arson. I'm Cara McGuirk-Allison. ATF's Tom Daly was a bit groggy when he got the call.
My middle daughter was her first Holy Communion on Sunday. And so we had a big party here, and family came down from Philly and whatnot, and I put them on the train, and then I think I grabbed an hour or two of sleep and then went in 11 o'clock at night and went on surveillance. And we knew after meeting with NCIS that we had Sweat on the radar. Scott liked him. Scott liked Sweat. And when I say like, he liked him as a suspect. I did not. I didn't think because our three witnesses from Anacostia Avenue did not pick him out, and so I was a little leery about it, but we stayed on him. And Scott said, you just stay on him on surveillance. And I came home the next morning, and about 9 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock that morning, I had just gotten to bed. You called my wife and said, I need to talk to Tom right away. She thought something really bad had happened. She has those instincts after that long, and she came in the room, woke me up. She said, it's Fulkerson. I was really asleep. I was asleep but awake. And Fulkerson was telling me, he just said, Tom, we got him. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, Carrie Tantarski just called me. the DNA is a match on every one of the fires. And it's this guy Sweat. And I was just talking gibberish because I was sound asleep, but awake, and I was, just incoherent. And he just said to me, "Let me talk to your wife." And I just instinctively handed her the phone. And he told my wife, "Get him up, get him some coffee, and get him to the task force right away." And so I'm still about out of it. Now I'm starting to come to. And she's, Claudia, my wife's telling me, "What's going on? What's happening?" And he said, "Who is this guy?" And I had the file on Sweat for surveillance, and I just showed it to her. I'm like, "This is him." And she goes, "That guy." So, I got up and got showered, and we went to the task force. And then by that time, it's a Cecil B. DeMille's production, and people are just, and then, this is your guy, and you have to get him arrested, and you got to get him under surveillance, and you got to get a warrants, and you got to meet with the prosecutors in all 3 states. And you're trying to keep this away from the media so that he doesn't know. And so it was about 24 hours of, I don't think I came home for, I wasn't home. I didn't come home for about a day or so. I mean, we were just round the clock typing and meeting with prosecutors and having him under surveillance so that we didn't want this guy to kill somebody in the meantime, and we wanted to get a warrant, and, you're trying to figure out what the hell you're doing. So it was a wonderful time, but somewhat chaotic.
So now our surveillance team went from, let's follow this guy around to, you can't lose this guy.
Right, because he could go set a fire.
He goes set a fire, and that's on us. That's a big responsibility. But we had to buy time. We already started doing the charging documents. All we had to do was enter name here, right? So the probable cause was already developed. It's a running probable cause log. Enter name, enter address, enter locations, enter DNA positive hit. So then we had to go and get charging documents from both the District of Columbia and in Maryland, because we had fires affected in both locations, and we weren't sure where the arrest was going to take place.
Teresa Stoop and Scott were working a weapons case together up in Baltimore when the call came in.
So all of a sudden, I see him. I'm outside. I see him. He's looked at me. He goes, I thought, oh no, did we get another one? Because I'm stepping out on this phone call. He comes out. He goes, it's Thomas Sweat. We got the DNA. And that was thanks to Chief Manger in Montgomery County, because again, they had quite a backlog, and Carrie Tentarski had a lot of work to do. And I called Chief and I said, look, as part of the task force, Chief, I need this processed, because this could be the guy. And it happened. And we got the notice. I will never forget it. And it was, like I said, such a release. But my first thing is get everybody in that office. So we needed to get those warrants. And that was going to take a little bit of time. 24 hours may have been pushing it, 48 hours we absolutely needed. So I got every single core member of an investigator on the task force and made a personal appeal and said, nobody is to leave here. And brief anyone in your command. I will take the heat for this. I will call every commander directly myself and deliver the message. That's the part of this job I'm going to take. You are to say nothing but execute what you have to for us to get Thomas Sweat into custody safely. And that's what happened. The morning of that takedown, getting up to that 48 hours was an incredible frenzy of activity, of jurisdictions, and where to take it down and what was going to happen. He lived in D.C. We had so many fires strewn. The agents had to get warrants in both locations. We didn't know what was going to happen.
Bob Luckett was the chief deputy fire marshal for the city of Alexandria, Virginia.
I was sitting in the church parking lot. He didn't go to work. We thought he was going to work. And he did all this crazy driving. We lost him. I had an agent from West Virginia with us, and we were using Nextel telephones. I don't know if you remember Nextel. We lost, it's called the eye. We lost the eye on Sweat. He was the only person that had it. I burned 2 cell phone batteries up that day just talking to him so much. He told us, finally we got everybody on track. We're setting up around, he went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken. He had a manager's meeting. We're there. Teresa goes into the command post. She gets a phone call. You've heard this story?
Yeah, tell me.
Okay. She gets a phone call. It's the state fire marshal for the state of Maryland.
Okay.
Congratulations, Teresa. Okay, Tom, thank you. What are you congratulating me for? Well, they just announced on the radio that you've arrested the DC serial arsonist. And she said, okay. That hadn't happened. She walks into the command post, tells Daly. Daly's running the command post. So I'm sitting in this church parking lot, and we're getting set up. I'm talking to Daly. Daly calls me on the phone, and he said, you got an eye on this guy? Yeah, he's in this store. He said, well, Teresa's here. Do not let him leave that parking lot. Okay.
Their worst fears came true. Just hours after telling the task force and department heads that Sweat was their guy, the media was already announcing the imminent arrest, potentially tipping off Sweat and causing him to flee.
Tom Daly said, he's on the move. And so I thought he was going to work. And then his next breath was, he's on Marlboro Pike. So I knew he wasn't going to work. And that's when he said, okay, no felony, no chases, no felony car stops. Let him go. Let's see where he goes. So they followed him to the other Kentucky Fried Chicken. I said, just wait in the parking lot till he comes out and don't let him get in the car. It's I am, you are. Next, easy, walk up next to him, introduce yourselves, and take him into custody. The night before, when the jurisdiction, we don't want him in Maryland, we want him in DC, I just looked up and I said to God, I said, just make this easy for me. And it was as clear as could be because it was all about safety. Focused on public safety to solve the crime, focused on apprehension, safety, executing the plan properly.
And he came quietly, right? I'm assuming? It was Bob who arrested him, I think, right?
He did. He came because he was probably shocked at that point because he didn't know.
Right.
I think he might have had an idea with the DNA. I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that he may have had a clue, but he didn't know what was going to happen coming out of that meeting. And he wasn't in any position to leave and to put somebody else in harm's way. Very important thing.
Bob Luckett becomes the point person because he's got eyes on Sweat. And things have to move faster than originally planned because of the media leak. They thought they would arrest him at the KFC where he worked, but instead, Sweat continued into Maryland for a corporate meeting.
Here's my word. I said, Daly, does Fulkerson know about this? That's what I said, does Fulkerson know it? He said, Bob, he said, arrest the guy. Do not let him leave the parking lot. I said, okay. At that very moment, I got Daly on the phone. I get hit on the direct connect from one of the guys who's in the back. Suspect's in his car. He's leaving. I'm in the church parking lot. I drove a black Ford Explorer unmarked. I hit the lights and siren. I speed across the parking lot, out onto the highway. His front wheels have just left the driveway and are on the highway, and I cut him off. I jump out of the car. He's behind the wheel. He's got his window down. I said, I'm a federal agent. You're under arrest. Do not move. Do you understand me? He said, what's this about? And I said, as soon as I can get you arrested and handcuffed, I'll explain everything to you. Do you understand? He said, yes, sir. I opened the car door and had one hand, and by that time we were surrounded. I pulled him out, cuffed him, patted him down, and then they took him away. And they took him to, it was a pre-arranged location.
So you made the arrest.
I was I was the person that handcuffed him.
We hope you're enjoying this segment of Arson, brought to you by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives and the International Association of Arson Investigators. If you're interested in learning more about a career in fire investigation, please visit cfitrainer.net. There you'll find over 20 profile interviews with current fire investigators in different stages of their careers and training modules that will help you become an investigator and help you in certification as you progress in fire investigation.
The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation honors the nation's fire heroes who make the ultimate sacrifice in service to others, and we need your help. Since 1992, we have been supporting fire families and departments with programs, services, and activities including the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Weekend, survivor support programs, fire service training, and a national memorial park to honor fallen firefighters. We also work with the fire service community to develop and implement initiatives to reduce line of duty deaths. This is work we are passionate about, and we don't do it alone. Help us help the heroes. Learn more and donate at firehero.org.
Things were moving at lightning speed, but everything had to be done by the book. Every T crossed and I dotted. Because after 22 months of looking for the arsonist, they couldn't risk botching the arrest. The attorneys who worked with the task force made sure the team had everything they needed.
Mythili Rahman and Jim Trusty were pivotal in this whole thing. We had an acting U.S. attorney in Maryland. The U.S. attorney prior to that, Tom DiBaggio, worked arson cases. He would have been, and he was an amazing champion of the work. I had a wonderful relationship with him. But having Jim Trusty, what a talent, and Mythili, they were the same, roll their sleeves up and go to work. And we would sit in there and talk through scenarios. The night before, when I was in my garage till 11 o'clock at night, they were so worried about this jurisdiction and the agents going to the judges' homes to get these warrants signed in both jurisdictions, because it was after hours and out of the Greenbelt office. People were starting to get anxious about who would deliver the message and where was this going to occur. And of course, we had the homicide in DC. My concern was safety, not having him destroy evidence, and getting the confession. It never wavered from the first day to the last. And I had so many conversations that night with Mythili and Jim, but it was my responsibility to make sure this happened safely and to make sure that no one got hurt.
U.S. Attorney Jim Trusty.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to protect my own skin. I'm like, it's great if you catch the guy, but if you do it with a bunch of suspect ways, like, unconstitutional ways or just bad tactics, I'm the one that's going to have to eat it when we go to court. And in some of these high profile cases, the pressure is so serious on the investigators to hurry up and make an arrest. People are dying, people are at risk, that they'll hit like that probable cause threshold and they'll throw it on the prosecutor like, it's your baby now. Well, a prosecutor's got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So we always have kind of a higher standard than the cops or the fire marshals or the agents when it comes to like, when should we put cuffs on somebody? Because if you hit PC, that may be a justifiable arrest, but that doesn't mean you've got a makeable case. And again, going back to seeing how many false tips came in that kind of clouded or could cloud the water with the sniper case. And then with this one, we wanted it to be a much tighter case than just hurry up and put cuffs on somebody.
So remember, the team had made plans to arrest Sweat in D.C., not knowing he'd be heading into Maryland. What you need to know is wherever Sweat is arrested, that's where he'll be tried.
Well, my agents were not freaking about moving into Maryland.
No.
because at the time, the law basically said you have the initial appearance in the district of your arrest.
Okay.
And now, in a lot of circumstances, that would mean, okay, you go to DC, for instance, like if he was at the KFC on Bladensburg, you'd have if you arrested him there, your initial appearance was going to be in DC. And politically, that meant they were going to be in a position to win the arm wrestling because they have the body. They're going to be like, no, we got our own charges. We're going first. So Maryland would have been in the back seat if that had happened. So, and there was definitely probable cause. There's definitely a legitimate arrest coming. My recollection of it was that my Maryland agents were like, we think he's leaving DC and going into Maryland, and we'd like to wait until he gets into Maryland because he should be appearing in Maryland. And just being totally candid about that, I was like, God bless, he should be in Maryland. We can work with DC, but we want his initial appearance here. Now, in the interim, what's happened over the years, because it's so nonsensical between like a Maryland and DC or a DC and Alexandria, now if you can present the prisoner in the originating district without any delay compared to when they'd appear in the district of arrest, you don't have to go to court to have any sort of hearing. So in other words, like it used to be, if you had a case in Maryland and you got arrested in DC, you appeared in DC, even if there was no case there. And they said, do you want to be extradited? Are you going to fight it? Are you going to, it was a cumbersome process. Eventually they said, this is ridiculous for like eastern states and districts that are close together. And they basically changed the rule where if you could still appear same day, they don't have to stop in DC. They can just drive you to Maryland. So this has been kind of practically fixed, but at the time it was very clear that wherever the cuffs go on is where he goes to court. And that was going to be a momentous swing. And so when they said he's driving into Maryland, we think he's heading into PG, I was like, that'll work. And, that's how it played out.
Teresa was surprised that Sweat was driving out of DC. They knew from surveillance that he was a very routine person, and heading into Maryland was unusual.
Wow, that's not what I expected. He's on Marlboro Pike, so now he's in the Maryland jurisdiction. And I said, well, I don't want any felony car stops. I do not want it. Let's follow him, see where he goes. So we have the radio, we can hear it. And I get a call from Maryland State Fire Marshal Bill Barnard. He said, Teresa, it's on the radio. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So I said, he's on the move. He goes to a meeting at a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the agents are like, do we pick him up? Do we go in and get him? I said, no. Sit in the parking lot, wait for him to come to you. Do not let him get to the car. Simply walk up. I am, you are, let's go. And that's what happened.
But it's not over at the arrest.
No, the arrest is the beginning of the case.
Thomas Sweat is taken into custody. Scott Fulkerson and Frank Molino are prepping to interview him in hopes of getting Sweat to confess to being the DC serial arsonist. Teresa Stoop.
My number one priority was getting him into custody safely without him setting fire to the apartment that he lived in to preserve evidence, to be able to have the investigators get the confession I knew they were going to get. And all I wanted to do was get to those investigators that were going to do that interview. And I'll never forget it. I walked into the task force location. The agents were, Scott Fulkerson and the other agents were in the back preparing. And I opened that door so fast that I had big eyes looking at me. And I said, what's the percentage today that you're getting a confession? What is the percentage? And they're all looking at me. I said, 100%. You're 100% getting that confession today because you know this person more than he does. And he's ready to give it up. He needs that stress over. And in a way, they're like, okay, yes, 100%. But I think there was some doubts maybe in their minds that it might happen because of the homicides.
Jim Trusty says in an arson case, you typically want to get a confession because there usually isn't enough evidence to prosecute. But once a federal prisoner is arrested,
you're taking him to the courthouse. Sometimes there's a pit stop where they process them like at ATF or wherever. And I think that may have well happened here because you're also trying to get a statement. And because at that point, he can give a Miranda waiver and give you a custodial arrest voluntary statement that can be used against them in a prosecution. And arson cases in particular, it's really rare that there's like a smoking gun piece of forensics or an eyewitness. It tends to be circumstantial. So you really want your agents to try to get this guy to talk. And, you know, along those lines, in arson, there are definitely different kind of personalities at work in terms of like the pyromania and kind of sexual attraction to it and the pride of ownership of these fires. I mean, there's a really weird kind of combination of psychiatric aspects, but that makes it where they may well talk. And in this case, I mean, once Sweat got arrested, you know, he went from talking to proffering and, you know, closing hundreds of cases. So it kind of never stopped.
Tell me what proffer is.
So a proffer typically, and this was an unusual case, a proffer typically is something where a defendant who's already been charged comes into the U.S. Attorney's Office and lays out truthful information about, in most cases, it's about not just themselves, but the other guys that are part of their conspiracy or that did other sorts of criminal activity. The benefit they get is they get what's called use immunity, which is basically also known as Queen for a Day, which basically means like we won't use your truthful words against you. So as long as you're telling the truth, you're protected, you're immunized, and you can speak freely. Then the prosecutor in most situations sizes that up and decides, do we want to use him as a cooperator? Do we want to give him credit at sentencing? You know, or is he lying, or is it just not that helpful? And what was unusual here is that Sweat was only proffering about himself. So it was a very different kind of scenario. And I really can't think of any other one that I had that played out that exact way. His attorney was the chief public defender in Greenbelt, John Chamble. And John's a tiger. He's a great lawyer, great guy, not afraid to try a case. And I've tried plenty with him. But you know, he knew early on that the leverage was over the top, that this guy was going to get a life sentence and there was just no crawling out. There's DNA, there's confession, there's, you know, it's just going to be slam dunk, multiple jurisdictions. So he frittered on the edge in terms of trying to, you know, get something for his guy. But this was really kind of a, you know, a bit of a humanitarian moment. It wasn't like he was going to suddenly get out of jail. But he agreed to do this conversation, and I don't remember the exact sequence, whether it was, I thought we did some of this before he pled, but I can't remember if it was.
That's what I was going to ask you too. So the proffer is different than the plea.
Yes. The plea was the formal proceeding in front of the judge where all the prosecutors came in and he acknowledged his guilt to a variety of charges on several different charging documents, actually, or at least a couple of charging documents. And eventually, I mean, and the sentencing was almost anticlimactic because we had stacked up these charges called 18 U.S.C. 924C, which is use of a destructive device in connection or in furtherance of a crime of violence. So that's using Molotov cocktails or whatever we want to call them, the devices here. They would qualify as a device and they were used in furtherance of arson. And what happens is the mandatory minimum sentences accumulate very quickly there. So it's a 5-year mandatory for the first offense. It's 25 for the next one, it's consecutive. And then it's life. So when you get to like 3 or more of these, you know that the judge has almost no discretion. They have to enroll a life sentence. And then we also had murders from DC and standalone arson counts. And so, you know, his overall numbers at sentencing were like life plus 1,600 months or some 1,600 and change, which is kind of nonsensical and when it, you know, in terms of what he's really going to do. But, you know, that's, again, we had federal statutes that applied to serial arson. And when there's death resulting from it and when there's multiple uses of devices, then the stakes get astronomical. And so his attorney knew early on, like, look, the best we can do is like ask for which prison we're going to. And I think that, and John, you know, I'll speak for him a little bit because he probably can't. I mean, I think that he knew in his heart of hearts that, you know, if you're going to go away for life, why not give some peace to some people? Why not close out some stuff? And that his client was an easy sell for that and that he was willing to do that. Now, the proffer, in a typical proffer, you'd have like 1 or 2 prosecutors, a couple of agents, a defense attorney, and a defendant. So we would use the small conference room in Greenbelt, and the 6 of us would sit there, and you'd roll through it. And usually the prosecutors kick it off with like an introductory speech about like how this works and what immunity means, and how you have to tell the truth and all that. And I did that actually in this case, but this one we had like closed circuit wiring to other rooms because there were so many investigators that wanted to be there.
It
So
was overflow.
yeah, it was insane. It was like we could have used like the Capital One Center, and everybody wanted a piece of this. Now the rapport was really Scott, but the trust from Sweat was he was obsessed with Scott. He had made comments to Scott about liking his shoes, and we started talking about how Scott needed to wear a uniform, and we were basically ready to pimp Scott out to close cases and get confessions. And he was a good sport about it, but we to this day we still talk about some of those stories.
While Scott and Frank begin to interview Sweat, Bob Luckett was still with Sweat's car.
He sent a flatbed out. They put the car up on the flatbed. Then I followed the flatbed from that KFC to the lab. They pulled it in to a garage, and I continued, even though it was in the garage, I continued to sit on that car until we got a search warrant. And then once we got the search warrant, we went through the car. That's when we found his leather case with the hole cut in it where he kept his camera that he would wear over his shoulder.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
He would surreptitiously video people.
Really? So it was like a bag that you would put over your shoulder with a video camera inside.
And he had a hole in it, and he would turn it on and walk down the street. If it was somebody that he found sexy, and then he would take these tapes and he would have them, and then he would go home and play the tapes and masturbate to the tapes.
Did you find devices in the trunk of the car too?
No.
Nothing was in the car.
No. He had 2 devices in the trunk of his car until Scott and Frankie interviewed him. And he had said he had made a New Year's resolution he wasn't going to send any more fires. And he had made it until April, but he was really starting to get the urge to do it again. So he had made 2 devices and was carrying them in the trunk. And when they interviewed him, he went and threw them away. Now, he also told me told us that he had scrapbook of all his trophies, and he threw that away. And I have to tell you, to this day, I don't believe that.
I think it still exists.
I think it still exists somewhere.
A small, basic room set up like a mini conference with a video camera recording from one end. Scott and Frank are dressed in suits. They took no part in the arrest of Thomas Sweat. But now it's their turn to confront him. Months of meticulous evidence gathering carefully presented to the person they know through DNA is their serial arsonist.
For the first 2 hours, he's denying being involved. He's denying being the serial arsonist. Frank Molino and I are developing rapport with him. We're providing him bits and pieces of what we have. It's a typical interview strategy. Chief Blackwell comes in, thanks him for being there.
I believe that one of Sweat's requests for the plea deal was to meet you,
Yes,
right? And that actually happened.
it did.
Can you tell me a little bit about that encounter?
It was a little bit unsettling because I did not expect that I would ever meet him.
Right.
I was not involved in the takedown. I went over in the afternoon. He was in a conference room, just him, and there just he and I alone.
Whoa.
Yeah, I walk in and I go, Thomas? He said, yes, Chief. Oh my, he does know, thinks he knows me. He said, hey, I just wanted to apologize to you. And I said, well, you really made it hard for us. He goes, yeah, I know, and I'm really sorry. And then there was that, that awkward silence that inevitably occurs. And he was seated and I was standing, and we were just kind of staring at each other. And I said, well, I've got another meeting, so I'm going to move on. And he said, well, okay, goodbye. And out the door I went.
Did he ask to shake your hand?
No. He was cuffed.
He was cuffed. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that
Wow.
that was very, very different. Very, very, very different. And he was like, you might imagine. I mean, you don't know a monster when you're looking at one. And there he sat, somewhat meek and passive. But he knew what he had done, and I knew what he had done, and we had our moments. What wasn't long, and there was not a lot of conversation. But yeah, I spent a few minutes with him.
We're thanking him for coming in. We're admiring him for what he has done and how it's taken us so long to find him. We're playing into his ego, and at that point, he then confesses to being the serial arsonist.
Do you remember how he said it?
He not only remember how he said it, but he remembers in graphic, specific details as to every single fire that was presented to him. So for 4 hours later, and in a videotaped, audio and videotaped, documented confession, he provides us with those 45 fires that we mentioned earlier. Real specific details on every one of them as we presented to him. That's 4115 Anacostia Avenue. How was that a close call?
There was two young guys. Absolutely, these would be the guys to catch me because they were the only ones who actually saw me. I feel why didn't know.
So I want you to tell me a little bit about this day. We're looking at the tape now, is this where he confesses?
Yes. It was planned out. We always had a plan. We were always, with Scott, Tom, myself, a couple others, would always look, what happens if he gets caught tonight? What happens if we get this case tonight? Who's collecting the evidence? We were kind of like always thinking, is tonight the night? But we specifically had, if he gets arrested, there will be certain individuals who do the interviews.
Frank says there are two things that you want during an interview.
You want the truth. And secondly, you want the interview that was obtained legally, constitutionally obtained legally. The two main things you focus on. You don't want the suspect to lie. It doesn't help the case. It doesn't help the case at all. You want the truth. And you want to make sure that when you get that statement, whatever information you do get from the individual, it's legal. So me and Scott, we just focused on the interview. And then we're not out on the street that he sees us, and then we're going to try to go do an interview.
Right.
We're focused on the interview.
And you're saying focus on the interview. So I'm looking at we just freeze framed this video. And so you're both in suits and ties.
Correct.
And there's a large poster where it looks like a map of something. I'm
Correct.
not sure what that is. And then there's lots of file folders and pictures all over the table.
Yeah, we had blown up maps of the various areas that were marked with where all these fires were.
Got it.
I think I did also have the homicide jacket. One of those jackets were the Edna Jones jacket I had. Also the photographs here are the pants, the Marine pants.
That's right.
They're the Marine pants, and some of the DNA was we actually showed that to them.
What is the jacket from Jones? I don't think I know what that is.
The case jacket. We call it the case jacket, the Edna Jones.
Oh, got it. The case jacket.
We call
Okay.
it a jacket. Yeah, and I think it was one of these.
Got it. Okay. That's
And then we
these
had,
brown folders.
then we
Okay.
had basically what we had there was photographs of the scene, like not detailed, but of the house, maybe where the door was burned, where the fire occurred. The Marine hat, I believe we had, and the pants, I know we had the pants, and some maps of areas. And our goal was that, you get a confession from him, and the maps and things would freshen his memory to assist to identify the ones that he was involved in.
Got it. And I think there's a picture of the cover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So you had pictures of these items that you were showing him. Okay. So then, what is the actual purpose of having the map and these items? So are you telling him a story, or are you having him tell you a story?
You want him to tell you the story. You don't want to put things into the individual's mind. You want them to tell you the story. Those photographs, we had already shown those photographs there. So they weren't just like, we didn't stage anything. So none of that staged. We talked to him first. And I guess at the beginning, you'll see where we read his rights to him, advised him that, what his constitutional rights were. He didn't have to talk to us. We advised him that, like we would anybody that was arrested, that you can talk to us, even though you waive your rights that you want to talk to us. Anytime during that time you want to say, okay, that's it, I no longer want to talk to you, we have to stop.
Got it.
Just because you sign and say, yes, I'll talk to you, you have the right also to stop at any time during the interview.
So before this video happened, did his lawyer contact you and say he's going to confess, or did that just surprise happen during this conversation? Just surprise happened.
Yeah, he never had to my knowledge, he didn't have a lawyer. No, this was
because he had
afterwards. This is the day he's arrested.
This is the day he's arrested. So he didn't have the defender yet.
No,
okay, got
and
it.
that afternoon, how you go, somebody makes an arrest, they got to go to a hearing.
No, but yes.
Yeah, preliminary hearing.
Okay.
You go to a hearing.
Got it.
Whether you get held, file the charges in court.
Yes.
So that afternoon, after this interview, we had to get him to the courthouse in Greenbelt so he can be formally charged, and they set a bond and all that. Okay. So the only other picture of him, the public picture, has got me and Scott walking him out. That little picture,
yes,
and I'm a little short one. Scott's there. That picture was taken as we were leaving. We didn't know the media was downstairs. We were putting him in a Suburban at the Greenbelt ATF field office, which was part of Baltimore Division.
Got it.
So to get him over to the courthouse, and from there he went to the Charles County, one of the sheriff's departments. They put him in. Like I said at the beginning, we read him his rights. He waived his rights, agreed to talk to us. Well-mannered. I mean, he's soft-spoken, very soft-spoken. Initially, we introduce ourselves, tell him why we're there, what we're investigating, why he was arrested. Initially, he denied ever being involved initially. And then we showed him some evidence. At the beginning, we started mentioning about the DNA. At the beginning, like most people, I believe he thought that you're going to get DNA through blood or semen, not other methods of getting DNA. So, but I think when we showed him that picture, and then he says, okay, they got DNA. Of the pants. Right. But he wanted to see more. So I remember we didn't really show him more than he started confessing about burning. Initially it was, why do I want to burn someone's house when I'm trying to get a house myself? And then as he was confessing, we showed him pictures, the map of the areas. We showed him some of the locations. He recognized them and gave some detail to each case.
Were you surprised by the level of detail that he was able to share, or did it seem not extraordinary?
Yes, and the only reason being is because of the number of fires have been set.
Right.
So getting a confession was very important. And I mentioned earlier, there's two things that we wanted to make sure that we had. One, the truth, and two, a statement from him that was legally obtained. There are two main things. If you get a statement that's illegally obtained, you're not doing the case no good.
Teresa Stoop.
It was the safest and to a horrifying 2 years of all of the fires that he set. And the agents took off to go to the interview room. And the next thing we hear is Scott Fulkerson comes out and said he confessed. Confessed to the homicide, confessed to, at that point, I think we had 46 fires that we had documented, never dreaming that it was going to go to the numbers of 350 fires. It was just something.
Scott Fulkerson.
Now, again, if we didn't do our homework, there's no luck involved in this. If we don't have those documented, if we don't have them identified, if we don't have the evidence spelled out, if we don't have the room set up the way it was, if we don't have Chief Blackwell coming in and speaking to him, if we don't have the FREST team, everything is choreographed specifically for this moment, then we may or may not have had that opportunity to receive his cooperation and him to confess to ultimately those being those fires. Now, what that means is all we would have definitively were 4 fire scenes that we could link him to. Although very significant, well, we at least knew of 42 other fires that we wanted to have information on and give us confessions to, but we knew there was even more than that.
Next time on Arson.
Well, his fire setting and a lot of his other things he did in life, not related to fire setting, were driven by his sexual urges.
The dark, twisted motives of the arsonist are revealed.
I hate to say it, but because I'm so much against the idea that arson is a sexually motivated crime. He's probably the one case that I can think of that's truly a sexually motivated arsonist.
Arson is brought to you by the International Association of Arson Investigators in cooperation with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Our executive producer is Scott Stevens. Our editor is Tracy Wall. Arson is produced by Platform Media with help from Emily Vaughn and Mariah Dennis. Engineering support from Andrew Chadwick. Our theme music is by The Last Knife Fighter, and I'm Cara McGuirk-Allison.